So first of all, welcome everybody, and thank you, Michal, for your intro about WeWork, and thank you, Pierluigi and Bastian from GitHub, for making the long trip over here. So thank you so much for coming. So welcome to the second Wix in the North meetup. My name is Eyal. I am an engineering team leader here at Wix, and specifically here in Wix Haifa. I've been working at Wix for about 2 years, and with this amazing group of people, who are basically the smartest people I've ever got to work with, so it's a pleasure. You guys rock. What I'm going to talk about for this meetup, as you probably saw, the title is Tipping the Scale. What I want to talk about is basically kind of what we do here at Haifa. So just a little bit about what we do here before we get started. We are responsible for the back office at Wix, specifically the dashboard page. Basically, every person who has a Wix account, he builds a website using Wix. And he has this back office and this dashboard where he sees all the information about his site and all the things which he needs to do in order to achieve greatness and make his site really great and popular and everything he needs to have a better business. Just a few more words about here in Haifa. We've been here for about 6 months and our team is growing. If you're interested, talk to me or any other guys here with the Wix Haifa shirt. Like I said, we're responsible for the dashboard, which is the most visited page at Wix, which with about 400,000 page views per day, just this specific page, which is roughly the same amount as people each day in Times Square. So it's a lot of people who go there. In addition, we have the hackathon here at Wix. And we did something really cool, which hopefully you'll see in the future at Wix. And we won second place in the hackathon. And we are very happy to have all of you here for the Wix in the North meetup sessions. And hopefully this is the second, but not last meetups. We hope to have many more and many more interesting speakers. Last time we had Director of Engineering from WeWork. Now we have GitHub, and hopefully more interesting people will come to talk. So let's talk first of all about the scale of what we do. So as you probably all know, Wix serves about 150 or over 150 million users. And like I said, specifically the dashboard page, which we are working on, has 400K visits per day. And it's a lot of traffic. And before we get to the solution of what we did or where we are right now, I want to talk a little bit about what we had before. So let's talk about Boris. Boris is a photographer. He has a site at Wix. He's a Wix user. And he has many different things he has hooked into Wix. He has a blog, and he has a photo album, and he's selling his photos online, and he sends newsletters and whatnot. And basically, in the old solution that we had at Wix, there were many big back offices. You had a back office for sending shout-out newsletters or handling your contacts or your blog and many other things. So we had roughly around 20 different back offices, and it was a really weird experience for the users. It was a hassle engineering-wise, and overall a very bad experience. And we wanted to take care of that. And one thing we decided was it was time to have one back office to rule them all. And instead of having multiple back offices with multiple sidebars and pages and whatnot, one back office to handle all this information so it's clear for the user, and it's much easier for us as engineers to handle it and develop it. So the concept that came into light, and now anybody who has a Wix site knows this as the back office. Internally, we call it the business manager. basically it's one back office which changes dynamically according to what the user has installed on his site. So if we're talking about Boris here, so he has the photo albums and the booking services and sending emails and all that stuff. So everything is in one space over there. And about a year and a half ago, we had what we called the Blitz. Basically, we took all the engineers from our group and we rented an office space in South Tel Aviv, and we brought engineers from all the different groups at Wix. And we basically got everybody to convert from the old back office and integrate into the new back office. It was a big challenge, a lot of code, a lot of engineering effort. It was about a month long. And in the end, we got what we wanted, and we got this unified experience. And in the process of doing this, we realized that a user needs to have a dashboard. Basically, he needs to have a space where he has an overview of what's going on in his site. I mean, people say site, but behind the scene, for every site, mostly, there is a business there. There is a person, for example, in this case, who takes photos, who uploads these photos, he sells them, he sends newsletters, here I'm doing this, I'm doing that. He manages his contacts, he's making events because he's a wedding photographer, and so on and so forth. So we had the dashboard, and this is dashboard V1 basically, and I'll move over here a little bit. Basically, the experience that we had was that we had here what we call the site detail. It was the information of the site and where he had various actions he could do on the site. And then he had different banners and information from different verticals and horizontals. So what is verticals and horizontals in the Wix lingo? Horizontal is something which is important for across Wix, and it doesn't end with just whatever profession you have. So if we're talking about the photographer, for example, he's using a tool called Shoutout to send newsletters or handling his contacts. These are horizontals. Everybody uses this, even if you're just an e-com site, if you're sending, I don't know, t-shirts, or if you are a photographer, you need this tool. It's a horizontal, and everybody uses it across. But there are also verticals, and in these verticals, there are tools which are unique just for whatever you have installed on your site. And basically here you can see that there are tips from the Wix blog, and this area handles basically information from a vertical. And this area over here is tools for your site, which basically is common actions, which are more on the horizontal aspects of things. And yeah. The infrastructure under the hood for this thing, it was all built with React and Redux and TypeScript around it. It was one big monorepo. There were several other small NPM dependencies, but basically saying we had one deployable. Each time we wanted to do a change, it was deployed, and a couple of minutes later, everything is up and everybody's seeing this experience. One thing that we wanted to do in order to improve perceived performance is that we wanted to add what we call a skeleton. So if you see here in this example here, you have a spinner. Basically, it's kind of bad for perceived performance. Does everybody know what perceived performance is? Or okay, so let's talk a little bit about perceived performance before we move forward. Perceived performance is not how fast your website really is. It's how fast people think it is. You know this all the time. You see it all the time, but you probably didn't know that that's what it's called. You know, if you go into Facebook or GitHub or LinkedIn or whatever, you have something that looks like this, usually. Some people call it a skeleton. Basically, it's an overlay which renders really, really quickly, and sometimes with animations and stuff like that. Basically, it gives you the feeling of what this site is going to look like already. So if you're looking at this image over here, and you can already tell that, okay, I'm going to have some kind of a image here and some text over here and over there. And you get the feeling that things are moving along. So it looks much better than just a spinner. And it was pretty great, and we felt that the perceived performance was really better. But all in all, when we looked at this dashboard experience, we had several issues with it. And the first one was the performance. So like I said, it was one big project. And it meant that if we wanted to change something in one of the direct NPM dependencies, it meant that the entire project had to be re-downloaded by all our users. So just imagine that if you just wanted to change something in one component over there in the middle, you had to deploy the entire project again. It meant that QA had to go over the entire thing because the entire project had to be GA'd again. And it meant that every single user went to this page. When we're talking about 400,000 people a day, basically they had to re-download the whole bundle, the whole JavaScript and CSS of this page, which got pretty big. And to say the least, it wasn't so great, especially if you're in countries where the connection is not so great. I mean, over here we have pretty fair connection. But if you go to some places in Africa or Asia or Eastern Europe, the connection is not so great. And every time you have to re-download these bundles and the JavaScript and the CSS, you really feel it, and the website feels really sluggish. Just like, for example, the site details thing that we saw at the top. Just recently, I checked it, and it was 115K. And you're saying, what's 115K when you run it here? It's nothing, but again, poor connection, it really makes a difference. Perceived performance. So like I said, we changed to this big skeleton, like we call it. And it was definitely an upgrade from one long spinner, which spins endlessly. But the issue was that there are several different components here, and each one of them is ready at a different point in time. For example, if we go back to this image of the dashboard, so this component, for example, loaded after, let's say, 1 second, and this component was ready after 2 seconds. It meant that the skeleton would still be there after 2 seconds. It wouldn't go away until all the components were ready. That's the experience that our product managers wanted. And because they said we want the holistic thing, we don't want things to pop up. But it made the website feel slow, because the slowest component, that's your speed. You're as fast as your slowest component. Another issue was with the which we have with the dashboard was product-wise. We had, like I said, this dashboard was supposed to serve many verticals and horizontals. Everybody's supposed to pour their information into it. And we made it a platform that all the other groups in Wix could hook into it and add their information. But unfortunately, it meant that this dashboard became very big in size. The page would scroll, I wouldn't say endlessly, but it would be pretty big. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with the term below the fold. The fold is basically where your screen ends and where you have to scroll to get to the rest of the information. And information which is below the fold automatically gets way less views and way less interaction. So it was important that we get this stuff above the fold as much as we can. And in addition to all these problems, there was also the technological aspects of having one big project. It meant that every new developer that came in had a long onboarding process. Everything was with Redux, which is great, but it's very complex as well. So it was pretty difficult for new developers to hop into this project. So what we did was a lot of brainstorming, and in the end we came up with this concept over here, dashboard 2 basically. As you can see, it's much smaller. You're actually looking at the entire page. Depends on your computer screen. You might see all of this almost with no scrolling at all. Our main focus was basically this component over here. This was our answer to solve the product issues. instead of having different areas of setup widgets for each of these verticals and horizontals, everything is poured into this single widget. We call it Omni Setup. It handles the information for the different verticals and horizontals. I don't know if you can see it from far away, but you can see here that it handles information. Here you can see that it's both for connecting domain and growing your business and adding this and that. So it basically served all the different verticals and horizontals together and really solved our product issues with that. Performance. This was one of the most interesting things that we did here. We separated each one of these widgets into a different component, basically, an entire lazy component. Does anybody know or has ever used lazy components in React? Great. So almost no one, and that's great. So let's talk about this for a second. What are lazy components? Usually, first of all, how many people here use React? Great. So almost everybody. So it's really important that you know this concept. A lazy component basically means that in order to keep our bundle size from being huge, we break our bundle into different parts, and we only fetch from the server, from the CDN or whatever, the statics, which we need to be rendered right now on the screen. And in our example, it was really important because what we did was basically we broke this dashboard into different, to small pieces. And then the dashboard itself, the bundle of the dashboard itself was very, very, very small. It rendered really quickly. You got that perceived performance effect that everything is loading and things are happening. And then we lazily loaded all these components. And the way a lazy component works is it renders, when the React tree DOM wants this component, it requests, it makes a request to fetch the bundle, the JavaScript and the CSS from the CDN. And until that bundle arrives, basically it renders nothing. In our case, it rendered the skeleton. That was our initiative behind it. And once that bundle and CSS arrives, then we switch that piece of the skeleton into a rendered component, and it seemed kind of seamless. We specifically used an open source library called React Module Containers, but if you are if you're kind of like hooked into what's new in React 16.8, I think, basically the latest version of React, it's now being built into React. It's called Suspense, and you should read about it. It's very interesting. But the concept is the same, basically. You render nothing, or you render some sort of a placeholder, and then once the component is ready for you, only then you fetch that information. In this case here, we wanted to individually fetch all the components separately, but just imagine if you had like a big page with tabs or something. You don't want to fetch whatever the information is on the third tab unless somebody actually clicks on this tab or something like that, because you just make the bundle huge and load times longer. So we used a lot of lazy components. And one of the things we also did, because we had all these lazy components, it was easy to separate the skeleton. You can see here an example where we are basically, we have a skeleton only for this part here, because all the other parts, they already rendered, the bundles arrived from the CDN, they arrived, they were ready, the information was fetched. So we already showed that, and it feels to you as the user that things are moving really quickly. But in reality, the entire load time is probably the same, give or take, but it feels really quick. You can already see this information, you can already interact with the page. An important key metric which is checked on websites for performance is time to interactive, and you want that to be as fast as possible. Basically, it's the time where the user could already interact with your page and do several actions. So that was also a motivation to separate all these skeletons into different pieces. In addition to having these pieces completely separated, it allowed us to deploy each of these widgets completely separately without having to deploy the entire dashboard completely. Because now every widget was its own repository, its own deployable. It was just JavaScript in the end. It allowed us to just deploy one part to make a kind of like a staging environment for it, see that it's working, and then GA it, and only GA that specific part. And that meant for all the users who went to this page the next time, everything, all the bundles and all the CSS, they were not changed. So they didn't have to re-download them again. It was just cached in the browser automatically for you. And you would only download that specific part which changed, which is, it was a dramatic improvement in performance across the board. Product-wise, I'm not going to go too much into it, but I'll just say that it was really great for our conversions and increased in completion of setup steps and so on and so forth, and it was really a huge success. And then after we celebrated and everything was great and it was completely GA'd and open to the entire public, we thought, how can we take this to the next level and improve performance even more? And one thing where we noticed that we had this entire pattern with the lazy components all the time is basically that the parent, it requested this component, and it would render nothing until the bundle arrived. Once the bundle arrived, the data would start fetching. And as soon as the data arrived, then the component would tell its parent, I'm ready, and we switch from the skeleton to the component itself. You can already see by this timeline over here that everything is serial. And that's problematic. We thought that we can improve this much more. And the way that we did, basically, that we started fetching the bundle and the data at the same time. We already knew what the data, where the endpoints in the server, the server are. So we started fetching the bundle and the data at the same time. And once they were both ready, then the component would tell the parent, I'm ready. And it cut the render time for all these components at about 50%. So it was a drastic improvement. And another pattern that we saw is that all these widgets, and I've kind of made a terrible illustration here, but you can see that every widget here has, it's comprised of different building blocks. And basically these building blocks are, some of them it's code that we actually wrote ourselves. Some of it is code that we imported from various NPM packages. A classic example here was Axios. It's a wrapper for making, XHR requests in the browser. And we saw that we are using these packages across different widgets all the time, and there was no value for this. So what we decided to do is basically we extracted all these common packages into the dashboard itself, and we have there a dashboard API. And when a widget it requires one of these packages, instead of requesting it from NPM and basically bundling it inside, it requests it from the dashboard. And that way we shaved the bundle size from each one of these widgets by reusing the code and reusing the packages over and over again. Basically, with all these improvements, we got the dashboard to load under 1 second, which is, I think, at least pretty impressive. And basically, what I want you to take, the key thing I want you to take from this presentation is that you should consider which parts of your code which you want to share. For example, the code that repeats itself, packages, behaviors. It doesn't even have to be in order to save bundle sizes or stuff like that. It can be basically to make their developers more sane and not have to repeat code and look for code elsewhere. And consider what's good to actually break apart. For example, in our case, it was to break apart the skeleton, to break apart this big repo into different pieces. And one of the added values that we got from breaking from breaking this repo into different, many lazy components is that we were able to completely ditch Redux altogether. And now, since every widget is a small microservice, each one of them just uses native React for its state management because they're so small and they handle just their small piece of the world. So there's no need for this huge God object of Redux. And don't get me wrong, I love Redux and there are things that it's great for. But in our use case, it was just not needed. And we dumped the code that handles it and the packages that came around it, and it saved our bundle even more without adding complexity to it. And that's it, basically. So thank you very much.